Welcome back to the Leather Shop. I'm your host, Matt Roach, and this month we have Corbin Edwards from Corbin Lane Leather Co. Corbin, thanks for joining me, buddy. How's it
Oh,
going?
it's good, man. I appreciate you having me on today.
First of all, right when you first started talking, I was like, oh man, look at this. I love the Southern accent because I don't get it up here. So whenever I get like somebody with a truly Southern accent, I'm like, nice.
Uh,
It's it's very rare I ever meet somebody up here with a Southern accent.
I was born and raised in a little town called Texarkana, Texas, and I've learned that the draw just kind of follows me anywhere I go.
I love it. That's where one of my favorite makers, Angie, I think she's in Texarkana. She, we're trying to get her on a podcast eventually. I just gotta convince her. She is a brilliant accountant, and I keep saying that that would be the most exciting episode. So if you guys are listening and you want to hear about small businesses and accounting and your taxes and not going to jail, make sure you message us and let us know so we can convince her to jump on. Because I think there's probably a lot of people who are like, "Yeah, I don't want to go to jail. I need to. I need to know how to do business side stuff."
I think that's a side of the industry that gets overlooked a lot. So definitely valuable information.
Yeah. So you're down in Arkansas, and right when we started off, I clearly didn't realize that you were in the central time zone. So we were already off by an hour right from the jump. So that was on me. But give me the spiel. Give me your what's your story? How'd you end up making leather goods?
Yeah, man. No, I was running a little run specialty store like 4 years ago, and I met a guy named Corey Yates. He runs a little knife making shop called Yates Unicorn Ranch, and I went out there. He was one of my customers, and he invited me to come make a knife with him. Once I got the knife made, and I feel like this is a pretty common story for a lot of guys who get into it. Um, but no, he had me come make a knife, and then I needed the sheath, and I realized that I could get into leather making way more affordably than I could get into forging. So that's kind of where it started off initially.
I can tell you that a lot of people, their story is never going to start with a unicorn ranch. I think I immediately just went to Google because that's it. First of all, that is a name, and I'm glad we gave him a shout out because his logo's fantastic. It's a buff unicorn. So
Yep.
I had thought I saw everything. I lied. I have never seen a buff unicorn up until this point. So there's a first time for everything. I love it.
Truthfully, if you see him, his
So
beard is like three times the length of mine. So he in himself is a sight.
I like it. Now I kind of want him on. I feel like I'm just gonna go the full gambit. Man, that is a name. Yates Unicorn Ranch. Man, does he have a full workshop and everything? Does he make? Is it a working shop? Does he make a lot of stuff?
Yeah, man, he does a lot of special order stuff. Pretty much, he retired from the military, and then he started getting into more of the knife forging side, and then started getting a lot of orders from that. And so he's been going around all through Arkansas and just kind of the four states area, and working with all sorts of guys, just building his craft and trying to make that kind of his full time gig now.
I love it. I would love to make my own knives and tools, but I think my wife would beat me if I picked up any new hobbies. And my square footage, as I've talked about many times, is very small and it's one in, one out at this point. So if I came back with a forge, I'm pretty sure she would beat me and then give me paperwork. But do you still make stuff? What's the deal? I feel like I'm almost more fascinated with the stuff that I have no idea about. So, do you ever make knives anymore?
Man, when I go back out toward Atlanta, I'll visit with him, and I like to make stuff. I just got really fascinated. I was a contractor for a long time too, so I've just always been fascinated with how stuff is made as a general rule. When I got into the forging side, it it was a medium that I had never worked with, and it really just kind of opened the door for me to realize that a lot of skills can be learned if you're willing to just put in the time and actually realize, like, okay, you're not going to be good at this out of the gate, but if you'll take the time to actually sit with someone who knows how to do it and they're willing to pass on the knowledge, you can learn anything.
I would agree with you on that. I think Leathercraft is a perfect example. And you know the funny thing is too, even with knives, you're like, oh, how hard could it be to, make a knife, make it sharp, take a grinding wheel. It's the same thought process people have with it's a wallet. It's two pieces of leather, you glue it together and you just put it under a sewing machine. And I was guilty of it when I first started. I was like, "Oh, how hard can this be?" And the first one I made looked like it got run over by a train, and then the train reversed, and then it went over it again, and then it just teared it. Like it was awful. It was terrible.
It, it was funny. So one of the first pieces I ended up making was actually for that guy. It was for Corey because I mean he was my mentor in all of it, and so I wanted to give him one of my pieces. And funny enough, he actually ended up rolling over that wallet with his truck accidentally, and so it literally got ran over. Maybe not by a train, but at the very least, a pretty large truck. And it the nice gravel embedded into the leather. It was something to behold. But now it's got a story.
That actually is a really great story. I It also shows you how durable leather is. I mean, you can beat most leather. I will say it's interesting how leathers are so different based on how they're tanned. I can't tell you how many like different types of leathers I have even at my house, and they're not even remotely similar. Some you could, build a house out of, and some, if you look at it the wrong way, it'll fall apart.
Yeah, yeah.
It's crazy.
It's interesting, man. I remember when I first started working with chrome tan stuff, and just the sheer gap, because I started with all the vegetable tanned out of the gate because that was the most convenient thing to in relation to doing the forging. But then I got more into the craft and I started working with the chrome tans and the suedes and everything else. And I just had stuff start falling apart in my hands. And I was like, I've got to take a totally different approach to working with this stuff from what I was doing before.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of knowledge either. And this is really funny. So my son, we let him use the iPad sometimes to talk to his friends, and out of nowhere, he's never texted me before, and he just said hi, which is really funny. He knows I'm in here recording. So for anybody with young kids, it's kind of funny when your kid learning to read and write, and he just types hi in all caps. Now I completely. Oh no, I was talking about leathers, and the first thing when I first started, and you touched upon this, and I wonder what your experience was that there was so many leathers, but you didn't know how to use them. You like splits and suedes and top grains and chrome and chrome XL and veg tan and exotics. That was one of the most overwhelming parts when I started.
I think I found after a while it was easier to just start with one, figure out what it does. If you can take the time to just work with the one piece, make a lot of things out of it. It doesn't have to be good. You just have to learn with it. And if you're not willing to cut into it and turn it into something, it'll sit on the shelf. And then you'll buy another roll of leather, and then you'll never learn what to do with it in the first place.
I agree with you. I think the best thing that I ever did was buy a hide of something because I it's so easy to buy a square foot of this, a half a square foot of that, 2 square foot of this, a bend, and you don't get the practice because you need the same thing in the repetitiveness. And that I think he just asked if he can come in. So for this episode, we're gonna clearly have a special guest because my son wants to come in and say hi, which he hasn't actually made an appearance in any of our episodes. Other people's kids have made appearances, but he hasn't because usually it's probably because he can hear me and we're only like he's like right his room is right next to mine. So he can actually like hear me doing it. And I usually am pretty good. I try to either do it like during lunch or on a weekend when he's not around because it's clearly disorienting. But yeah, I think the practice one thing that I found really interesting was the stitching. You can stitch the exact same way and it's different. Hey buddy. Yeah. You waving? Here,
What's
what do you
up,
want to say
man?
to the people? Hi. You can't hear him because he has the headphones on. Here, you want to hear his voice? All right, there you go. What do people? What do you want to leave Leathercraft people with? Tell them. Tell them what you have to say. You have no idea. Well, you can say anything you want. There's like 10,000 people that are listening.
I don't know.
What would you say to 10,000 people if you could tell them something? All right. Well, that was riveting. I'm glad that you came in here and shared that.
Huh?
Can I have my headphones back
Yep.
I'm
and go
honored to
back to my
meet your
regularly
acquaintance.
scheduled
Yep.
programming? All right, buddy boy. You going to bed? No. All right. Love you. All right, folks. So that was riveting. You got to hear my kid give you no, he should have gave us some, information about stitching. So back to our regularly scheduled programming of stitching into, say, a shell cordovan versus a chrome tan that's soft versus a chrome tan that's hard. All three of those I find extremely different when even when I'm just doing something basic like stitching. And you could do the same exact movements every time.
The big thing that started to kind of, so I don't do any machine stitching with any of my stuff. Everything I do is hand stitched. And aside from actually just keeping a straight line when you're trying to punch it, when you get to the stitching side, I realized a lot of it was just tension based. That's where I was starting to get a lot of the deviation from leather to leather. And those chrome tans,
Yeah.
you can't tug on them the same way that you would with a vegetable tan or anything else. And as soon as you do, you get one out of place and everything else follows it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you're the tension really is the most important thing because when you can tell when one is in there tighter than the other too. It sticks out like a sore thumb. And even if it's just one stitch and it's even just slightly tighter, I always feel like the next one is slightly looser, no matter what. Even if it's not on purpose and you do the same, it's just, and I don't know the rationale behind it or how it works, but it just feels that the one after the tight one always seems to feel looser than the one before it. And I don't know why. I'm sure there's a mathematical reason for it or a physics thing. But yeah, I don't understand that. But going back to you, because nobody cares about me, what it, so I'm going through my little fun questions. What is your favorite part of the craft? If you were just looking at like the whole process, what's your favorite part about it?
I've always loved the design side, but I've always loved designing stuff since I was really young. And I think I just realized there's a lot of problems that you can solve with this kind of craft. And I love finding problems to solve. It's just entertaining for me. And so I feel like a lot of my joy comes before I ever even get the leather in my hand. It's more so just what's the problem I've got laid in front of me and how can I use this medium to fix it? Um, so the design side is just, it forces my brain to actually assess what's going on and what's the reason I want to make this in the first place. Um, but it really just
I
kind of
like that.
depends. Yeah, I mean, it opens up a door for you to think, and if you can stimulate that part of your brain, once you actually start making the products, it's a lot easier to make something when you've already assessed what the problem is and how it needs to get fixed.
So I have no idea what you actually do for a career, but if I had to guess, if you love the design part in this, because it's very similar to me, you probably work. Well, I don't know. This is going to be a hot take. I so you did work construction, so this could be completely off. My guess is you are a 9 to 5 or like behind a desk me computer guy. Because when you love I found that people who love the design part and solving the problems, it's because they don't have that level of thought in their daily job. So you still think, but it's different. It's a different type of thinking. So am I even closer? Or are you still in construction?
So funny enough, I actually took a job in Little Rock over the past couple of months. Me and my wife moved out here, and it's my first time having a desk job where I'm actually doing home sales.
Nailed it.
Yep, yep, you were spot on with that one.
Nailed
And
it.
the 9 to 5 side was one of those things where I never really saw myself in a corporate position at all. But I also recognized I've got a family now and I need to make sure that that family is covered. And I still love to do all of these other crafts and everything else. And one day it's a beautiful dream. But in the meantime, get something that pays the bills and actually equips you to do the hobby.
Yeah, it's for a lot of people. I've noticed it's an outlet. It's you can have creativity and you can express yourself differently than your day to day job. Because most people, I'd say most of the population, do something that's very different from what their level of interests are. And for a lot of people, it's an outlet to kind of, well, and as in any hobby, it's something that you can find joy in, and you can be yourself and create something. Whether it's people who are artists, or I guess this is a form of art, I guess, in a way. The funny thing is, I what are your thoughts on this? I find that construction is just as much of an art as somebody who makes a leather product to somebody who paints. I feel like we look at them differently, but they're all kind of art in some way. You build something in your own way. What are your thoughts? You're a contractor.
So I think it's the nature of permanence that starts to come to mind. And my wife is actually a phenomenal painter. That's pretty much all she does. And so I look at what she does, and it blows me away every time I see it, because I have no idea how to create something like that. But I can go build a house. The reality
I
is
like
like
Yeah.
that house may fall apart one day, but that painting, as long as it stays on the wall, will be exactly that painting for those as long as it stays there. And even with leathercraft, like, yes, it's a medium that lasts for a really long time, but sometimes people roll over it with their truck. It's just it's part of what happens. And so I think there's this nature of permanence that you don't have necessarily with things that are constructed as with things that are created with someone who paints or acts in that kind of medium. And so I feel like it does get a little bit of a stigma with it, where it's just like, oh, that's just some dude making wallets, when in reality it's like that dude may have spent years perfecting that wallet and making sure that stitch line is gorgeous every single time, and dialing in, this is the exact measurements for it to always work. That's an art in itself, but it's more pragmatic.
Yeah, and it kind of, there's so many things that fall into that too. I always it's when people, they do pottery or they do anything like that, where you're right. Like, I think in terms of what is art, people consider it really just drawing or some form of maybe photography or something like that, where it's a kind of picture based, but they don't look at other aspects as a form. I like how you described it as permanence. That's kind of a unique way of describing it. I've never actually heard anybody describe it like that. But you're right. There is a way that it's timeless. I actually heard this thing once, and they said the greatest way of telling about the world around you, of like a time period, is to look at movie posters.
Hmm.
And I can't forget it, because it's like, you look at Gone with the Wind, which was what, 100 years ago at this point, almost,
Yep.
and then you look at something from the 80s, and then you look at something now, and they're kind of reflective of the world around, like the time, like the everything that goes around it. And I always thought that was really fascinating, that art has this way of defining things around you, and the way you kind of perceive things.
I think it becomes a staple for a generation at that point. I mean, it's what people associate it with at the time, because the guy who lived when Gone with the Wind first came out, yeah, that was cutting edge. This was the
Yeah.
newest thing available to you. And then 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years passes, and he can remember exactly where he was when he first saw the poster.
Yeah, it brings you to a time and a place, and it incorporates a lot of things. And I always find that really fascinating. So you are clearly in a very creative household. So who was more of the creator first, you or your wife?
Really, we were both creators before we ever met. Funny enough, I mean, she ended up messaging me on Facebook one day and asked me out for hot tea, and that was how we met, and that was less than 2 years ago. and within that time, I mean, we've gotten married, we've both moved from different states, and now we're here. But it we both kind of realized that we have very different takes on creativity, but they blend really well. And so if we can just bring them together, we're both going to have more fun.
What kind of tea did you order? That's the real question.
Ooh, ooh, I want to say it was an. I want to say so. Actually, I went to her house, and I think she made me an Emperor's chai that night, and it was
Ooh.
fantastic.
That is, that I can see why your relationship blossomed. If you're going to go with a chai, I feel like that is a very strong way to start a
It,
relationship.
it was a bold choice, but she told me to
Yeah.
trust her, and I chose to trust her. Here
Hmm.
we are.
I could see a chai, maybe a matcha, there's a few options I could see that could be very very positive to start a relationship, but I think chai was a very strong. Now, what did she have? Did she have chai as well?
Let's find out. Meredith, what tea did you have when we first met? She had vanilla chai. There it is.
Ah, yes. I kind of like her selection better, so I'm almost in her camp right now.
Uh,
Vanilla chai is delicious. It's
that,
fantastic.
if it's any consolation, I'm in her camp too. I trust her to make the better decisions on the tea side.
So, are you guys a tea or a coffee household?
Ooh, I actually just finished making a cold brew from last night, and that thing was incredible. So we're a tea and coffee household. We've got it all.
Oh, you're a mixed household. I like it. Yeah, I am a big proponent of cold brew. I got this like cold brew maker like 15 years ago at this point, and it just sits in your fridge all night and makes it, and it's the greatest thing ever. Very leather centric. We're sharing with people. You know, but I feel like if you're a crafter or an artist, you're probably overly caffeinated as it is. I can only imagine that you take in copious amounts of caffeine.
Minimal sleep and enough
Yeah.
caffeine to run you through the minimal sleep.
Yeah. And then if you have kids, just add an extra like 100 to 200 milligrams on top of that, because then that's just self preservation, just trying to stay alive.
That's getting up
Uh,
and hoping for the best.
Yeah, pretty much. You have that first cup and it's just an IV in. I actually wish that I could just have an IV waking up to a nice, I've already had my first cup of coffee. I feel like that is the way to start your day. Why haven't we got that far?
I mean, this sounds like an
We have so
opportunity
much
for business.
technology. I wouldn't trust me to do it. I don't think me or you should be creating anything like that. It seems way too complicated. It's something that I wouldn't trust myself. I'll stick to the basics of working with numbers and leather. I think that's probably a safer bet for me. So leather. So where are you selling? I know you're selling your products online. Where else are you doing like shows or what
Yeah,
is
man.
it? Is it kind of like side gig type thing?
Yeah, a lot of it's side gig. I've got one shop out in Louisiana that I work with some. I'm actually going to redo an entire line for them at a veg tan. It's out of a 511 tactical out in Ruston, Louisiana. But it really is. Most of what I've done up to this point has been commission based work. I mean, I post it up. If people see it and they like it, they give me a shout and say, "Hey, this is what I want. Can you make this?" And if I don't know how, I find a way how and I make it. Um,
That's the age old problem where if we don't know, we figure it out. And who was I joking around with? I think it was Shane Bo the Maker. We were talking about how we underbid on projects from like random times where you're like, oh, I can do that, and it'll be $200, and you look back and you're like, well, I spent probably 8 hours figuring out how to do it right, and then I screwed up once, and then I did this, and yeah, I learned a lot, but also you took a huge monetary loss if you actually factor out your time and
yeah.
resources and everything, because that is the time spent on things, I think, is the hardest thing on commission projects, which is
Yeah.
probably why I don't do many commission projects anymore. I mean, I know I don't really sell a ton of stuff as it is. Most of the time it's somebody, you know, ruin their wallet and they want a special one, and I say, buy me leather and I'll make it. But yeah, it is crazy the amount of time that goes into those things. Whereas people who do batch work can really save so much time and money. So you have do you have any machines, or are you 100% just your phalanges, just cutting it up and hand sewing everything? And
I make cardstock templates. I throw it on, I trace it out, I cut it out, and put everything together by hand. I would love to scale to a point where I've got clicker presses and dies and everything else, and a legitimate shop in that facet. But and for me, it was more so I wanted to know that I could do every part of the process before I start eliminating parts of the process.
that's a good point. Well, it's funny. So we're recording, so most people aren't going to hear this today, but it's Prime Day or whatever. They make a new Prime holiday for whatever reason. And it got me thinking. I posted in the Discord chat earlier that they're having a deal on an arbor press, a 1-ton arbor press. And it got me thinking back to when I first started. Before I ever got a clicker press, I used an arbor press for my dies because it was so cheap and economical. I think I paid maybe $75 for it. And today it was only like $50. And I was like, wow, like it actually is affordable for people to like get in and emboss things and use dyes and all of these things. And for anybody wondering, if you are going to get in and use an arbor press, because 1 ton doesn't have the same leverage as the big Weaver and all those other ones. And I got steel plates off of eBay to distribute the weight,
Yeah.
and I put dies in between it. I had this really ridiculously like intricate system where it went half inch, like quarter inch or half inch steel plate, industrial uh what was it? Cutting board, the
Yeah.
die, industrial cutting board, steel plate, bottom of the arbor press. And I used that for maybe 2 years before I got it, and the whole setup maybe cost me under $100 for everything.
It's brilliant.
And it's funny, I actually was trying to figure out ways to repurpose it, and I thought about tapping into it and making it so that I could use it as a setter for smaller projects if I wanted to emboss something, or I wanted to maybe put a pricking iron in there so that I could use it when anybody with kids will understand, don't want to make noise, but I still want to work at night. And that is the hardest thing nobody ever talks about. If you live in an apartment or you have kids, so what do you do when your kids are sleeping and you want to work? Because I found that so incredibly hard to do.
I've learned to batch things out as far as my projects to where, all right, I'll get at least one project to the stage that it's ready to stitch during the day. And then that's the project I'll work on at night. But I already know I'm not going to be able to hammer. I know I'm not going to be able to sit there and make any form of noise that's going to keep anyone else up. So just have it prepped beforehand. Otherwise, start cutting out the next project.
Yeah, that is a good point. You know what I also did too is I went to, what was it, Lowe's or Home Depot, and I got that drawer liner. You know, the stuff that you put in your big pull-out drawers?
Yeah.
And I put that all over my desk, and then I took a cutting board and I wrapped the cutting board in the foam, and then I used that to hit on. All from just one roll. It was only like a $10 roll. It's not expensive, but it's
Yeah.
complete. And then I put the Pondo board on top of it.
So I'm curious because the only time I've ever done something similar was I took the actual punching board, I dropped it onto the carpet, and I realized that the carpet would absorb all the hammering sound for me. Did that
Yeah.
work for you to actually absorb the sound?
Yeah, you don't hear anything.
That's
The
brilliant.
only noise you hear is the contact. So I think you could just put a piece of leather on the top of your pricking iron, and that would probably be the last piece to absorb the. Or you could just put a tiny piece of foam or something. But yeah, it absorbs pretty much all of. I don't use a metal hammer, so as long as you're using something that's plastic, or I have a Barry King maul that I use, and that thing will outlive me. So if anybody's wondering, that maul will outlive me. I'll never have to change it. It will be the longest lasting tool I ever have. And yeah, you don't hear anything. Just take an old piece of wood or a cutting board or something and just wrap it in that stuff from Lowe's, and
That'll be my
you
next
won't hear it.
project.
Yeah, and I got the Pondo board, whatever that thing is. I think it's a Pondo board, right? Where like the it self heals, but it's thick. It's not the cutting mat. It's the thicker one. You can get
Yeah.
it. Maybe Weaver has it. I think it was maybe like $10 or $12. It wasn't expensive. It's just essentially like a thick rubber. It's probably made from like used tires for all I know. Which is probably, if Goodyear's listening, sponsor me, because maybe I just found a new revenue stream for you. I think that could be something that they could make. It's essentially just thick rubber. There's nothing to it, and it really is great. But yeah, you don't hear anything. It probably would work great in apartments and anything. Carpets are another thing. That I bet you could just take a piece of carpet and put it on top of your desk.
I,
That
Given that
probably
the
could
house I
work.
was staying in, they didn't want me cutting out the carpet just yet. I figured my best bet, throw it on the floor and just make it happen.
Or what if you went to just a carpet store and just found their scraps? That's how I got my piece of granite. I have a giant granite slab on my desk, and I just went down the street to good old Arts Marble, I think is the guy's name. I continuously give this guy a shout out, and he has no idea that I continuously do it. I think his name's Arts Marble in, I don't know, Framingham or something, Massachusetts. So if you live in Massachusetts, go see Art. He's a lovely man. I just happened to be driving by and I stopped there and I was like, oh, okay. And he gave me this giant slab of offcut because he was going to throw it away. Otherwise, it's hard to get rid of those things. Extra carpet or extra marble or granite. Because what are they going to do with a 12 by 12 piece? Like, there's nothing they can really do with it. And
I
all those
lucked
other
out
places charge you.
when I was doing all the
How'd you get
contracting
your?
work. Yeah,
Yep,
I
there it
had
is.
I had one guy who we were taking out a marble tub that he had. And so I broke off all the frame and it had split down into like this 2 foot by 3 foot marble square. And I was like, you're not going to use this, man. Do you? It's like, I don't care what you do with it. Just get it out of my house. And it worked out well for both of us.
So marble tub money, that must be like serious money, right? To have marble tub money, that just seems really like, I don't know. Will I ever have marble tub money? Like, what's a marble tub cost? It just seems like it's something that's like $40,000. I have absolutely no idea what it costs, but it
So
just seems like a very expensive tub.
the guy we were working on, we were actually going back through and lining out. We ended up welding a custom bracket for his wall to hold. It was actually, we were switching all the marble out to onyx. And so we welded a bracket for this. I mean,
Oh.
it was like a 16 by 12 foot wall just in his bathroom. We had to cut a hole in the outside of his house to haul in this solid slab of onyx to mount to his wall. That slab alone was $30,000, and then the rim of his tub was the same onyx stone, and the rim of his tub was $15,000 just to do the edge of the tub.
So onyx is more expensive, I'm assuming.
It's silly.
I don't even want. I feel confident saying that I'm never gonna have onyx money. Onyx just sounds fancy.
It looks beautiful, but Lord have mercy. Oh, and his drawers in his closet were lined with zebra skin. I don't even know if that's legal, but it was. And every drawer in his closet, zebra fur everywhere.
Now that just opened a whole host of questions. Wait, so it was lined with zebra fur or
Yes.
zebra skin? You have to assume it was fake, because where would you even find that much zebra? I would hope it would be fake. Well, I guess if you have onyx money, you probably have illegal. That guy probably has a guy. He probably has a zebra guy. He's probably got a zebra guy out in Zimbabwe that he calls and just says, "Hey, I need more zebra." That that's a level of money that I don't understand.
His kitchen cabinets were
Was
all
he in oil? Because I can't imagine anybody else that makes that kind of money that is not in oil. In the South, I feel like all the rich people there somehow work somewhere with oil.
he owned multiple car dealerships all the way up through Dallas, going back through Texarkana. I mean, just across the state, he owned all sorts of car dealerships. And so, I mean, parked out under the carport, so not even in his custom built garage to hold all the other cars. He had like a fully loaded out Porsche GT3R that was just sitting under the carport, and the other half of his house is blown out so that we can actually put everything in it that he wanted. It I've never seen anything like it to this day, but it was definitely an experience at the time.
Well, we have something to strive for. Maybe one day we'll have onyx money. I like it.
If I sell
Actually,
enough
you know what?
wallets,
I I don't think I could sell enough wallets to ever have an onyx toilet. Or what was it? No, an onyx tub, right? That's what it was, an onyx tub.
onyx tub, onyx wall, all of it.
Now, does the onyx hold heat better, you think? Like, is there something special about the onyx?
Given that he blew out all the marble in the bathroom that was already in there, I think more for him it was a color update.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so you got marble out of it, so that's good. What is the next tool or machine you have on your radar? What's on your Christmas wish list?
Man, the arbor press is one of those things that's just going to be handy and expediting the process for me more than anything.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's just for practicality's sake, because I've finally got designs that I like to work with and duplicate, and I'm moving those things consistently enough that the investment's worth it.
Oh yeah, and it's only costs like 50 or 60, or today apparently it's only $50. So, yeah, I mean they're like crazy cheap. I would always tell anybody start with an arbor press. I mean, you're not going to get the same power like it's not going to do the same, but it's fine. I mean, yes, you have to push it a little harder and do it a few more times, moving things around, but I don't know. As long as you're doing things that aren't massive, you can do small items pretty easily.
And rinse and repeat some keychains, get a basic die for the wallets that I need cut, and I'm ready to rock.
Yeah, I think I bought 6x6 steel plates. I think they were 6x6. So it's not the biggest, but 6x6, you can fit a lot of small things. I used it a lot for coasters, keychains, wallets, like card holders, that kind of stuff. Nothing huge. When I did larger things, that's when I finally got a clicker press, and I was just tired of clicking things out. I was like, I just want something bigger. Uh, but it was so much cheaper when I got it. Now they're almost double the cost. It's crazy how much they've gone up. Like incredibly expensive now.
I've come to accept any expansion beyond the point where I'm at now is going to take a sizable enough investment that I want to make sure that it's worth making the investment when I make it. But I also recognize if I want it to grow at all from this point, I'm going to have to get to a point where the production side of it can actually start to scale. Because if I'm still hand stitching everything, I've only got so much time in a day when you're running a 9 to 5 and then trying to come home and make that happen and still be there for your family.
It actually did double in cost. They charge $1,800 for the clicker press. Like, I would be the first person out there to tell people, do not spend $1,800. I love mine. This thing is not worth $1,800. I I'm not Well, I guess I am throwing them under the bus. That is just ridiculous. I think I paid $9.50 for it. Maybe $9.99. I don't know. But that's insane. $1,800 for. Oh, that's just stupid. Well, clearly I haven't looked at machinery costs in a while. I would advise anybody, if you're going to spend, well, I guess it depends on what you make, but if I had the choice of, if I could only get one machine, I would get a sewing machine before I would get a clicker press if I was going to do it over again. But that's only me though. It's not, if you're cutting a lot of pieces and you're doing a lot of volume, clicker press probably saves you more time in the long run. I guess it just depends on what you make.
Yeah, that's
You
where
can,
I walled myself into a weird niche with all the hand stitching side, because now a lot of people who do ask me about it recognize the work because of the hand stitching. So I look at it, I'm like, well, I can go to a sewing machine, but then I almost have to rebrand what I've already done. And if I just go with the clicker press, I can actually get the stuff that I already know how to do. And at the very least, I've eliminated the cutting stage of all of it.
yeah, the cutting stage is pretty brutal. You know, it's funny now that we were talking about it. I wanted to see how much my sewing machine costs now to see what that costs now. And I don't even see my sewing machine on here, uh, which I'm hoping it's still here. I have a class 26. And I wonder, watch that be like 9 times the cost. Because you don't look up things you already own. There's no reason. I don't think it changed. I think it's the exact same price. That is why there's stand-up people over there. Look at that. Same multiple years. Well, no, I haven't had this as long. I've had the sewing machine for a little over 2 years now. But look at that. That price didn't. So for 2,600, you can get a class 26 with EPS, which is a positioning system, which I would always get no matter what. No matter what sewing machine I get, I would always want EPS on it. And that one's only $800 more than a clicker press. That is wild. It is a wild time to be alive. It is a wild time. Oh man. So you want to get some machinery. That's nice. What's a hand tool you want? I need to know what's on your Christmas list.
Hand tools. Man, I actually got the quarter pounder a little while ago, and that's been one of my favorite things. I've loved working with that thing.
Oh, the
That,
hammer?
yeah, that little quarter pounder has been super handy, especially on the stitching side with laying it down. But I'd like to try out his stitching chisels too, just to see what they're like. I've been using the Cinnabrox for a while now, and I've loved those. But I would love to try an edge creaser. Don't have an edge creaser yet. Feel like that would be a fun detail
Oh,
thing
those
to
are
add into
nice.
the work.
Those are nice. I use the heated side for my edges a lot. That's probably my favorite part. But it's funny. So it almost seems like when you come into Leathercraft, it's a rite of passage to get screwed on a pair of Cinnabrox. Everybody suckers you in saying, "Oh, you need to have this." And yes, I have multiple that I have sent away. I have a suspicion that there's maybe like two companies that make pricking irons, and they're just all different brands. And Cinnabrox, yes, they are nice. They are very well made. The only complaint I have is it is not very easy to switch out the French style uh, piece that they say it is. I find that extremely difficult and not as easy as they make it seem. Other than that, I have no. They make a quality product, but you pay through the nose. But if you were going to get other things, you could go on AliExpress and buy some for $25. I bought a Comovin craft set for under $30 once, and they're fine. They're serviceable. Like, they're probably the same ones that Quarter has. They probably bought it from that same factory, and he just threw his name on it. They don't look very different. I mean, how many factories are really making pricking irons? It's not like it's that big of an industry that, like, I don't know. I have a hard time believing that it's this massive. It's not like it's toilet paper or something. It's such a niche within a niche. It's probably like maybe two factories in the entire world that make them. I I have a hard time, but also that's just maybe me being me. But like, I think for most of these things, there's probably not many factories that are making things. But you should try out the. I got those. Actually, you know who else makes really nice ones, and I actually don't have a negative thing to say about him. Is Kevin Lee, and I don't know where. Maybe it's his website or it was. I forget, I think it was my buddy Marcel. So shout out to Marcel Makes. Check him out on there. He he may have told me, but they're really nice. They're really well made, and they're slightly cheaper too. They're really like strong. I don't know if you've heard or seen any of those, but they make a really nice. He makes a really nice one, and it got here pretty quickly too. Because I think it ships from like South Korea or something.
I, I've actually heard you talk about the Kevin Lee ones, and that was one of the things that made me look it up. Was just hearing it on the podcast before. And I've also looked at the KS Blade Punch stuff. The reality
I
is there's
have
so
KX
many.
Blade.
Like there's
I
so
think
many
I have
different ones.
5 or 6 different. So I have KS Blade, I have Kevin Lee, I have Cinnabrox, I have Camovan Craft, I have Rocky Mountain ones, I have Weaver. The Weaver ones are they're starter ones. You get what you pay for. They're junk. Like but also they cost a fraction of the cost of everybody else. It's like a Tandy set. They're strictly for beginners. If you plan on making a lot, they're junk. Like the tips got like you couldn't even really use them after a couple of months. And I could have gotten a dud pair. But also I think they were part of a beginner set that I think I paid $70 for the whole set. So I don't know how my expectations could have been too high. It was a decent value for what you got the whole set. But yeah, I have like 7 or 8 different brands, which is kind of ridiculous. It feels like I'm an enthusiast. I'm like instead of a watch collector, I'm like a pricking iron collector over here.
But it's a unique collection that not a lot of people will have.
And will have zero resale value when I'm older. My son will probably take them and throw them in the garbage because they will have no return on investment.
Well,
Most of them, by the end, they break over time.
that's where you just scale the podcast out to where people just want to buy them because it's your name at that point. Those were Matt's breaking irons.
That would be pretty great. I think we're about 50 years away. If I'm still chugging along with this thing in 50 years, then maybe somebody would want those pricking irons, but I feel safe saying that nobody would want any of my tools at this point. Mainly because it's not like I'm Peter Knits or something. I'm not making, stuff for like Hermes or something. Uh Also, he's like a marketing, like good for him. That man, he has a way I mean, I think most of his credit comes from his mustache. It adds a regalness to him. So I think most people will just say, "Oh, he must be great. His mustache is on point." I think that's probably his biggest. I mean, it's like man doesn't have a hair out of place. So if I could grow one like that, I probably would. You're trying. I can tell you're trying. Are you going for the knits method?
I would be honored to get to that point one day. I've spent the last 4 years just letting this go, and I realized that what it did is it aged me up enough to where people thought I was more credible than I was in certain situations. And so
Mhm.
that little run specialty shop I had started managing at 19. And I realized I was like, I've got to grow some sort of facial hair. Otherwise, people just think I'm a child trying to do this stuff. And then I just never stopped. And it's just stayed.
So, do you think that is the catalyst for success? A well done mustache?
It's
Is
got
that
me to
the
where I'm at
prerequisite?
now.
Maybe he was onto something a long time ago. I mean, you're doing a good job. I hope you keep up the good work. I mean, you clearly. I feel like the episode art should just be a picture of your mustache and like nothing else. Like it shouldn't be your work. It should really just be your mustache. And then people will like look at it and go, "Why would I listen to this episode?" And you'll realize it's a podcast just about mustaches.
If
Yeah,
they want
you
an
gotta.
extensive
I feel
grooming
like he
routine.
must. Yeah, I feel like I should have him on, and we can just talk about his mustache for like the first 15 minutes, and not anything leather related, just mustache related. It's funny. I never actually thought to reach out to him because I don't know. When I first started, I didn't want people to think I was clout chasing, so I didn't reach out to people that weren't already my friends. Like some of my friends had large audiences, but that wasn't intentional. We were friends beforehand. But I never wanted to reach out to people who had massive audiences that I didn't know. Because then especially nowadays, it feels, I don't know, disingenuous. Like you're just trying to get clicks and listens and all that kind of stuff. But
I think it's a funny balance of authenticity, man. Like we're in an industry that's already, it's not that it's saturated at all, but there's definitely names that people recognize. And then there's a lot of people trying to do this same thing that nobody's heard of in their life. I'm one of those guys. A lot of people have no idea who I am. But at the same time, I a big reason I even wanted to come on here was just so that I could talk to you because I realized you've been able to chat with so many people who have given you so much insight, and that's a valuable thing for me to get to learn from and be able to gain insight from. And I recognize like a lot of times we don't ask because we're afraid of an outcome when in reality like all I did was just shoot you a message one day. I was like, hey man, would you be willing to let me come on? I would just love to talk to you.
yeah,
I mean, I feel like we tend to stifle ourselves a lot in life because we're not willing to ask what could be a no. But if you never ask, it's guaranteed a no.
I feel like I should just swap it. I feel like you should just run it from here. Ask questions away. You here the next however long you run with it. Here, what should we talk about?
I one thing I was curious about, like, what was your initial inception to the craft for you?
Sneakers. So I was a custom sneaker. Well, I did custom painting on sneakers, leather sneakers, and that was what parlayed me into making leather goods because I always wanted to make leather goods, but I wanted to make shoes. I wanted to make sneakers,
That's
but
awesome. I
it's too expensive. I'd be broke if because you really do need equipment, and to do it right, you need expensive equipment. There are people who do it by hand, but and you need a lot of space. Space is another one. But yeah, that's how I got into it. It's funny. That's why I always pushed Angelus paints. It's funny that I see Angelus paints everywhere now. All these stores are selling it, and I always think like I have a reach of like three people. So no matter what I say, it's not gonna like businesses aren't gonna listen and start using the products. But I do find it weird that like Angelus is ever. I mean, granted, Angelus has been in the leather industry for the last 100 years making paints. But it's just weird that you see it on all the small middlemen selling Angelus paints now where they weren't selling it like a couple of years ago. Now, I don't attribute that to me at all, but it's funny how it's really easy to get it now. Everybody can get it. I still think they have the best. If you're going to paint the outside, it's the single best paint. It's awesome. And they don't sponsor me for anything.
I do have a question. It's not totally leather related, but this is something that I like to ask anyone that I'm meeting. And it doesn't have to be in depth. It can be if you want it to be. But it's a blanket question. Who are you?
Who am I? Probably just a dad, a husband. Probably is the way I describe myself. Because I think those when I think of who are you as you what defines you and how you define yourself.
Mm.
So I think if I was to define myself, those are the things that my world is pretty much revolves around my family. So it's probably just a dad and a husband. Everything else kind of comes after that, I think.
It's always cool to see what responses you get with that question, because a lot of times you do find that people associate themselves with their roles, their daily life. What am I doing all the time, and is that the encompassing aspects of who makes me who I am? Um, but it is also a testament to that's every waking moment of your life. These are the things that you're prioritizing and pursuing and trying to build and grow. And it's always interesting to see what people's perceptions come back with, because I've had guys respond with, I'm a Marine, and that dude, you're in your 70s. I know you're not active duty, but to you in your head right now, that's become permanently ingrained into who you are. And so
Yeah.
it's always interesting to see what people come back with that one.
No, I think, and I also think it's the experiences you've had too. And I think for so many people, especially anybody who's enlisted, it's a lot of times they define themselves by because they've had to endure so much. So they take it like a badge of honor because they had to serve in wars. Like pretty much we've been in a constant war since like the 40s in some capacity or even before that. So that's one of the few groups that I actually get. Like when you say who you are, people who are veterans, I get that.
Yeah.
Like you've been through a lot. Like that's one of the few things where it's like I'm a Marine or I'm in the army. Like I get that. That's one of the few that I actually understand where I'm like, yeah, that's an experience that kind of defines your personality, defines who you are.
Mm.
It's like life or death.
It,
But
my
it is
favorite response that I get is, I don't know.
I actually understand that too. I think most people don't know. If you asked most people what they were going to be when they grew up, I bet you less than 1% probably ended up being what they thought they were going to be when they grew up.
Mm.
Because like you were saying your job, you choose to do the responsible thing that's best for your family.
Mm.
But it's not what you'd really want to do on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
I think that's kind of how a lot of people live, where they do the responsible thing and not the thing that when they wake up brings them joy. I
Mm.
think that's probably why hobbies and podcasts like this exist, because it's for people in their free time, not their day-to-day life.
Mm. It's an outlet for discovery of yourself. It's interesting, man. I mean, I do feel like we tend to limit ourselves into roles a lot of the time, and we forget the freedom we have to be able to choose and pursue and actually discover what makes us feel alive. Um,
Yeah.
and it's when I think about me as a kid, I wanted to be an underwater archaeologist. I'm nowhere near that field of profession at all, but at the time, it was super cool to me.
You are the first person I've ever heard that wanted to be an underwater archaeologist. That is a very niche field. I like it.
I went to a museum with my dad growing up, and I saw a picture of this structure that had been made, and it was just a glass. It was just a glass tower, this cylindrical tower that had been dropped into a lake, and you can see a boat up on the top of the water behind the glass, and then like 200 feet down, you have just a bunch of people on the bottom of this water floor excavating a boat, and it was one of the coolest things I had ever seen.
That is that is pretty cool. I did just hear something speaking of underwater, archaeology or excavations is apparently they were trying to remove the Titanic, but it's so old and brittle that it can't be moved. If they were just to pull it up, it would just completely crumble.
Mm.
It can't be brought up in a traditional way, and I guess there's probably underwater archaeologists. There's probably somebody out down there, a structural engineer and an underwater archaeologist trying to figure it all out. That could have been you. You could have been the guy. And then I could have said I got a guy who does underwater archaeology. I could check that box off. That's a guy I do not have at the moment.
I'll see if I can find you
That is the
somebody.
guy I need. I would appreciate that because that is a, you can be rich and flex, but there might not be a much greater flex than having a guy that's an underwater archaeologist. I mean, that's got to be towards the top. I mean, that is a flex on top of flexes.
You bring that dude to the
I
party
mean, it's
and
like
you've got a
George
story.
Costanza.
It's like George Costanza.
Oh, I mean, he's a marine biologist. He's an architect, a marine biologist. But yeah, that's a cool profession. I think you should go back to school and pursue that. I think you should. I don't think you should give up the dream just yet.
It's funny,
You
man.
still got time.
I, that's one thing I always realize. Like I'm licensed in personal training and behavioral change and all sorts of random stuff. And I've done contracting and all these different jobs. I'm a photographer. I've done leather. I pick a thing. I've tried it, and I think I started to realize it wasn't about picking one field for me. It was just ensuring that I remain open enough to recognize that I don't know everything in this life. But if I can pursue all of it as much as humanly possible and keep learning, at the very least, I never get stagnant and I'm never going to just stay in one place.
I tell my son at least once a week that the most important thing in life that nobody can ever take away from you is education. And I wish somebody had told me that as a kid because it's the one thing in life that people can never take away. Anything else can be taken, your freedom can be taken away from you, but they can never take away education. It's the one thing that everybody, at least in the United States, you have an opportunity and it can't be taken away from you. Like whatever you read in a book, it's yours. You know it for life. And I think that's the most important thing. And that's why I've always valued doing things like the podcast and talking to people because I think sharing of knowledge is the most important thing that you can have. And I never really believed in people not being able to access it because of means. That always bothered me. I didn't like that certain things were not of like not available to people on a broad scale within reason. Like it's okay if things cost money, but within reason, like science is a great example. Like certain journals cost thousands of dollars to read. So it means that you can't learn breakthroughs in science unless you're like rich or you go to a prestigious university or a place that has a subscription to it. And that I like never could understand. I feel like knowledge should always be moderately attainable. Everybody should have at least a chance at it.
Look at the Library of Alexandria. We stored all of it in one place and it got destroyed and we lost a lot.
Look at
The more
that.
we the more
I
we
mean,
harbor for ourselves for the sake of prestige or whatever, we're losing an opportunity to share it with the world, and then all we do is hinder future generations from having the same knowledge and being equipped to make better decisions.
I think that this generation and more recent generations have gotten better in terms of, especially the trades. I think things like Leathercraft 25 years ago, you couldn't have learned anything. Most of the people who started a long time ago, there was like three people they could name, and that was it. And now, well, it's a gift and a curse because now it's so accessible that there's so many people out there, but there's also so many people who are just spewing nonsense because everybody thinks they're an expert. And I always say I'd rather talk to somebody that knows it than pretend like I am the expert on anything. I think it's ridiculous that everybody's just out there saying they're an expert, putting out a course. Some people actually are adding value, but everybody and their brother's making something. And I'm not sure that's always the best thing, but I think there is a lot more opportunity and value now than there was 25 years ago.
The internet did a lot for us.
It's a beautiful place. That's how we're able to do this. You know, it's funny how when we started, I even noticed myself like as like so right now for me it's like almost 9 o'clock at night, and this is like one of the few moments that I actually feel like an old person. I'm like, God, like it's 8:45. If you were to tell 20-year-old me or 18-year-old me that at 8:45 I was going to start getting tired, I would have laughed hysterically at you and said, "Yeah, right." And now I'm like, "Oh man, I could use some. I could use a cup of tea. I could go watch a game. There's a baseball game on. Man, I feel old." So, how should we finish off your episode? Since you're the host with the most, what else should we discuss before we let the listeners go?
All right, I'm curious because I used to be in shoe sales. What is the best
Ooh,
brand?
for what?
So I was in the running industry as a whole. So I was working with more like the New Balance, Brooks, on running side of stuff. Like, what is your, in terms of quality and overall build, who makes the best shoe?
I think it comes down to R&D, and I think a lot of the legacy brands have really great R&D. So Nike, New Balance, Asics, Saucony, Brooks, any of those ones are terrific products that any athlete and podiatrist and people in sports medicine would all agree that those are fantastic. But the it shoes are one of those things where it's really not a one size fits all. It's really a personal preference. You have to find the thing that fits you. And I think that's the hardest thing about it, where everybody's like, "Oh, I like Nikes." It's like, okay, well, do Nikes like you? You can't just put a shoe on and just expect that it's going to be comfortable. And I think so many people make that mistake that you have to do the thing that feels good. Like just because it looks good doesn't mean it's going to be comfortable. And then you're just going to end up with knee problems and ankle problems. So it's like, what's the point? That's why I'm always hesitant when I see people like making shoes. I'm like, do you understand how to make shoes? The reason why I don't make shoes is because like I don't want to be responsible for giving somebody permanent knee damage because I didn't think it through. Like I can't like in good conscience like if I make a wallet, it's not going to matter. That's not going to change anything about you. But if I make you a shoe that is like abysmal support and you wear it for 500 miles, there's a chance I mean, the perfect example is, and I'm sure in this audience, there's going to be very few people who probably know this person. His name is Lonzo Ball, and he plays for the Chicago Bulls. And when he was coming into the league, he had this really loud dad who thought he was going to change the industry and made a big baller brand. And now Lonzo's knees are so bad that he had to like essentially relearn how to run, and they had to completely reconstruct his knee because he played basketball in big baller brand shoes that were terrible for him. They didn't have decades of R&D and shoe design. Like there is actual careers of people who are in ergonomics in just footwear. Like that's a career. The same way as underwater archaeologists. And he probably, as a result of that one decision, probably lost out on $250 million because of one decision on what type of sneaker to wear. Actually, probably more than that. Probably like 300 to $400 million because he probably would have gotten another max contract, and he probably would have got a shoe deal because he was drafted second overall in 2017. So one mistake changed the entire trajectory of his life. So for anybody out there, Google it. But yeah, it's crazy.
My spiel with that was always your feet are your foundation, And any house that is built on a broken foundation, the rest of it's going to fall.
Yeah, it's true. You have to, and people like Nike and Adidas and other shoes because of the way they look, and aesthetics play a big factor. Now, don't get me wrong. I have a massive shoe collection and I have highly sought after things and I have bland things that nobody cares about because I like them. So, I think people struggle to separate the aesthetic from the function. And
Mm.
sometimes it's good to have shoes that are for function, and sometimes it's good to have shoes for aesthetic. Like they're different purposes. And I think people struggle with that. They think they can use both, and it's just not the same.
Not even close. I would love to see your shoe collection one day because I've amassed a vast one myself. So that's a very shared interest right there.
Yeah, I pared down a lot during the pandemic because the prices were through the roof. And I have a lot that are still in the boxes that I've never worn. So I sold I don't know, a decent amount, and I made like pretty good money because people were paying like triple the cost of a pair of shoes, which is like crazy to me. So I was like, I don't need that shoe that bad, So I just sold them and I don't know, put a new washer machine in or something. Like, it was like very bland. I didn't do anything fun with it. I pretty much like sold shoes and, put new tires on my car. Nothing screams adulthood more than, getting a new hot water heater with your sneaker collection. So that's essentially what I did. But yeah, and that market has crashed as well because there was just too much of it was destined to fall.
Yeah.
But the leather they use, a lot of their stuff is proprietary too. Like the coatings, like they just use for the most part pretty cheap chrome tan leather. Because if you look on the inside, you could still see like a heavy blue finish.
Mm.
But they use a very unique proprietary finish that I have no idea how they get their leather to do what they do. Because my son beats the heck out of shoes, and somehow the leather survives. So I don't know what it can't be it can't be very green. That's the only thing I can think of because I don't know what's in it, but it does not seem it can't be healthy. I don't know what it is. Actually, if anybody listening does know what it is that they put on for a finish or is a footwear designer, I would absolutely love to know. So message me because I would love to know what they because I think everybody would put that stuff on their leather goods. It makes it it's so strong. I have no idea what they put on it.
Let me know. It
So
might have kept the gravel out of that wallet.
it's true. It might have saved it. But so where can everybody find you now when they listen to this and say, I need all of his goods that he makes.
No, man, it's Corbin Lane Leather Co. That's the website, that's the Instagram, that's the Facebook. You can find it anywhere there. Um, yeah, man, no, I appreciate the opportunity to come on tonight. It's been really cool getting to chat with you, and I'm excited that I got to do this.
Hey, of course, man. No, this is exciting. Honestly, this is kind of the fun stuff when you actually get to talk to other makers and see kind of I mean, how else would I have learned about onyx and talked about mustaches? I kind of feel like maybe I need to just like bite the bullet and send him a DM. I mentioned a couple episodes ago about the Ergo, that company that was based in Massachusetts, and they flaked out like crazy. So I never heard back from them. For anybody wondering when the follow up was going to be, they were super excited to chat, and then they flaked. Reached out to them a couple times, and then just never responded. So for anybody wondering, they're not coming on because we're not big enough. We're not. We must not be Caller Daddy or Joe Rogan yet. One of these days we'll be because leather will have tens of millions of listeners.
Obviously.
Yeah, no, of course. So, hey, I do truly appreciate you coming on. This was really a kind of a fun opportunity, and I like learning more about the journey. So, appreciate it. And for everybody listening, appreciate you guys still tuning in, and we will catch you guys next month.